Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Michael Bungay Stanier. Excuse me. I've only known Michael for 5 years, and one of these days I'll get the name right. My apologies. Welcome to Grace Under Pressure. It's the show that deals with, the soft stuff. Aside from a host who can't speak right, we have great guests. Anyway, and when you do, Grace Under Pressure is about keeping it real when times are challenging. Mm-hmm. And as you will discover, Michael is very much a leader who knows how to do that. Welcome, Michael Bungay Stanier. My apologies.
Well, here's how I say my name, just so people know. It's Michael Bungay Stanier. But John, I once got a letter addressed to Michael Banging Spaniel. So you're still quite a long way away from the work of a pronunciation of my name. You're going to have to try a lot harder for me to get really upset about that.
Okay, Michael.
People watching, this is Grace Under Pressure. A normal person would have cracked by now, would have stormed off the set. I'm not talking to this guy if he can't even say my name right. Look at me. I am the embodiment of grace right now.
You are, and you're showing me kindness. Anyway, Michael is very much a force for positive change. His best-known book is The Coaching Habit, which has sold close to 1 million copies. I think many more than that now.
Over 1 million now, yeah.
And his newest book, which we're going to talk about, I'm going to get it so I can see it properly, How to Begin. It's an exciting book, perfect for our times. Michael founded a company called Box of Crayons, a learning and development company that helps organizations grow and develop and move from advice given to curiosity driven. He's had named clients from little companies that you might have heard of, like Gucci and Microsoft. Michael is a native of Australia. He now lives and a Rhodes Scholar, where he met his wife, I think. And he has lived in Toronto for many years and continues to change and upset the status quo for himself and seeking new challenges. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. A second time.
So. Yeah, I know. Thank you for having me back. I was kind of hoping that you'd just play piano accompaniment to me the whole way through this. And I know you've got a bit of a cough at the moment, a bit of a respiratory thing going on. So maybe you play the piano. I'll try and figure out what question is encoded in the keys, and we'll live the whole time you like that.
Oh, that would be fun. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out the piano's downstairs. I haven't figured out how to mic it properly, but I'm working on it. Anyway, so how did you come to write a book, How to Begin?
So I had to smash hit with The Coaching Habit 6 years ago, which was wonderful and a surprise. And I did a follow-up to that called The Advice Trap, a kind of companion book to that, which has also done pretty well. And as I was trying to write the next book, I was still wrestling with what does it take for us to change our behavior? Because on the one hand, we're creatures that evolve, and on the other hand, we love the status quo. And trying to write a book about behavior change, I wrote some stuff up about it, which I thought was pretty good. I sent it out to my friends, some of my kind of first readers, and they wrote back to me going, "This is a terrible book. There's nothing here that is worth saving." I was like, "Oh my goodness, that feels harsh." So I looked through it, and what I found in the book was this one phrase, which I thought was great. It was like, we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. So I'm like, so how do we work on the hard things? And what are the hard things? And in a way that I hadn't really realized before, I suddenly kind of bumped up against the kind of the tradition of goal setting. And I was like, I don't like most of the stuff around goal setting. It's not, I like goals in general, but all the guidance I've been given on goal setting hasn't worked for me. SMART goals, the more I looked at it, the more I'm like, that's a pretty not helpful acronym. So that was what inspired a book around, its most obvious level, it's around goal setting. Mm-hmm. The next level down, it's around claiming ambition for yourself and for the world. And then at its heart is this, how do we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things?
Okay. Well, Michael, you actually begin the book, How to Begin, on the cover. I will read it. It says, "This book starts now," right here on the cover. So you cut to the chase pretty immediately. And you want to be a force for change. I love that. So start doing something that matters. And you tell your own story, I think, in the book about building your own podcast. So what did that entail?
Well, for the first time in my books, I really wanted to tell my own stories around that to kind of role model what some of this stuff looked like. I'm never a great fan of books where it's kind of fable books. Those never really ring true for me. So I thought I'd tell two stories of worthy goals. A worthy goal is something thrilling and important and daunting that I set myself, or I was setting myself. One was from a little historical. It was giving up being CEO at Box of Crayons and that transition and what that felt like and looked like.
Right.
The other one, which is an ongoing living project, is trying to build a podcast that, that was it. Like I started off by going, I think I want to go around a podcast. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, okay, so I do want to start a new podcast, but framing it like I want to launch a new podcast just wasn't that exciting for me. It didn't meet the three attributes that I lay out for a worthy goal: thrilling and important and daunting. And what I teach in the book is this process for drafting and redrafting a worthy goal until it lands. And so where I got to was going, look, I want to have a top 3% podcast, a podcast that gets more than 10,000 downloads per episode in the first 30 days. And that felt really interesting to me because now I have to design and create a high-end podcast. I have to think about marketing. I have to think about who the guests are. It was a real call to create a distinctive podcast that had a level of professionalism and gloss and had a commitment to marketing that I'd never done before. And now I'd found a goal that was thrilling and important and daunting.
You are a restless, creative soul, I will say. I mean, you build a company, then you walk away from it, and you're not 65. You're, compared to me, a young man. So I love that, and that's that's part of your charm, is that you have an open-heartedness, and I'll say it like childlike, and I don't mean that diminutive, but in some ways you haven't really grown up, Michael.
No, I'm a 14-year-old, but with better skin. Like I'm over my acne, but I've got the mentality of a 14-year-old. I think you're spot on.
But you know what? The other thing, Michael, is you said something that twigged my interest. You talked about a goal, and then you talked about refining a goal. And I actually hadn't heard people use that term because they say, I have a goal, which is to do X, but you said honed it, and you kept honing it. So that's the process that you explore in How to Begin.
Yeah. Part of what I've had feedback around the Coaching Habit and the Advice Trap books is that one of the things that's most powerful for people is what's called the focus question. And here's what the focus question is. It's what's the real challenge here for you? But here's the insight behind the focus question. The first challenge is never the real challenge. And we waste a vast amount of time by trying to solve the first challenges that show up rather than staying a little bit more patient and pushing and trying to get to the real challenge. And I think the same is true with goal setting as well. The first goal that shows up is probably a crappy first draft. I mean, John, you and I both authors. You know the kind of the pleasure and pain, which is just a code word for pain of writing books. And you also know that the first draft, the first draft is not going to be great. The first draft is going to be okay if you're lucky. And part of what it means to be an author is to work and rework your drafts. And I just think the same should be done with your goals. I mean, if your goals are important enough that you're going to commit some of your time and energy and effort and resource to it, spend some time making sure it's the right one. You don't want to climb the wrong mountain.
Yeah, I like that. Don't claim the wrong mountain. And you just hit an operative word, and we use it all the time. The word is commit. How do you define commit, or what's your approach to the process of committing?
Yeah. So the How to Begin book has three broad sections. Section 1, set a worthy goal. And this is the process of drafting and redrafting. Section 2 is commit, which we'll talk about. And then section 3 is how do you cross the threshold and actually get going on your worthy goal. And what normally happens with the goal setting thing is you come up with a idea for a goal. You don't draft it. You just go with the first thing. And then you're like, okay, what's the first thing to do? And you kind of move into action right away. And, for small goals and small stuff, that's the right thing to do. But for a worthy goal, something that is thrilling and important and daunting, it's really worthwhile just pausing for a moment to ask yourself, are you up for this? I mean, really? Because no better than everybody who's listening in, including Joe from Boston. So nice to see you again, Joe. Thanks for tuning in. everyone's had the experience of trying to set something that feels big, and then for some reason they just don't get going on it. They just succumb to the resistance. And a key part of the commit step is just to realize resistance is part of the deal. Absolutely resist. If you're picking a goal that's really important and daunting, you will find resistance. It will be there. You will notice it. That's part of the process. But you're really asking yourself, kind of a Yoda moment. You've got some choices. Do you do it or do you not do it? And if you do it, actually the interesting place to start is, imagine that you set a goal and then you choose not to do it. What are the prizes and punishments of that decision? What are the pros and cons? Because there are advantages to not taking this on.
I'm glad,
Around status quo. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because not everything is worthy of it. And even if you get to it, their circumstances may have changed for your life or whatever. And so there's no use in prolonging a worthless pursuit or less than worthy of your time. Yeah. In the section commit, you have a little section, and I love it. It's page 121, and I even marked it, qualities and how to define yourself. And it's words like generous, brave, provocative, compassionate, a mentor, committed. What led you to help us define ourselves? I just love that combination of all of those things. So.
Yeah, part of what you're doing when you're weighing up the prizes and punishments of taking on a worthy goal is like, what do I get from this? And for sure, there's the obvious things that you get from pursuing a goal, which is the outcome that you hope for from the goal. But if we come back to that unlocking phrase, John, from the very start, which is, I unlock my greatness by working on the hard things. Honestly, I am most excited about unlocking people's greatness. Like, I want them to achieve their goals, but it's really, how do I help people just keep growing and keep evolving, becoming the next best version of themselves?
And you do that. Obviously, that's what the Learning and Development Company Box of Crayons was about, both individually but organizationally. So if I come to you, Michael, well, not me, because my ego is way too big to do this, but you'll say, Michael, there's nothing great about me. What do you say? I mean,
Well, in your case, John, I'd have to agree. I mean, I'm sorry. you nailed it. I mean, one of the greatness things you got going is a deep self-awareness, because you nailed it there. But I'm kidding, of course. Look, it's just like, I mean, one of the great things you can do is understand the best of who you are. And sometimes we get that through the work ourselves by figuring it out. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody be a mirror to you. That's why you and I do coaching in part. It's because what coaches can do is they go, let me tell you what I see in you, John. I see in you grace. I see in you a host. I see you in a commitment to beauty. And not all that's going to be right or land, but sometimes it's just really helpful to have somebody else say the thing. And you go, I could probably not easily admit that to myself, but I think that's true. I do.
Without question. And that's so much of what coaching is, or just being a trusted friend of giving one straight talk, even praise. When we say feedback, we always want the good stuff too. But we so many of us, and this is a positive, I think, is we undersell ourselves. So that's why I cottoned on that section about the adjectives that you use, because one of them popped out at me is the word brave. We don't say brave as much as we maybe in past times. And it takes courage. I think it takes courage to read this book or implement its practices. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. And it comes back to those conversations around commit that we were having, which is, if you take on a worthy goal, there are consequences. There are consequences to you and how you see yourself and how you live your life. There are consequences to the relationships that you have. There are consequences to what you're spending your resource on, your time and your money and whatever else. And I think a deep insight is that the status quo is far more powerful than we realize, in terms of wanting to pull us back and say, look, I know you're not fully happy here, but it's safe and it's knowable. So why don't you just keep hanging out here? And to your point, which is like, okay, what does it take for me to journey to the edge of my competence and my confidence and my sense of self? that does indeed take a bit of courage and a bit of bravery, I think.
And I think the bravery and courage comes in a next question I'm going to have. And that's about, okay, we're committed. We're working our way through this book. We're working our way through our life change, but we're going to make a mistake, or as you call it, a false step.
Yeah.
So how do we acknowledge it? How do we, as you say, how do we transcend it? So,
yeah. Sometimes when we set a worthy goal and we look back into our past, sometimes recent, sometimes a bit more distant, we're like, oh, I tried doing this before. It didn't work that well. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll just give up because, look, the evidence is in that I'm not that sort of person. And I would rather say, look, the fact that you've made false starts is just part of the deal. It's a very rare person indeed who sets a worthy goal and just flawlessly and effortlessly steps through the journey and gets to the other side. So I go, look, what can you learn from this? And the expression that I stole from somebody else was like to throw your hands up in the air and go, how fascinating. How fascinating when something happens, when a mistake happens, when you stumble off the path where it gets confusing, because how fascinating is a wonderful phrase. It puts you in the place of curiosity and of learning and of this too will pass. So I think one of the best ways to deal with false steps, false starts is to go, how do I learn from this? And the doorway into learning is how fascinating.
And that's wonderful. And it's the learning is you got to pay attention. And here's where I think one of the many beauties of this book, and if we can, I'll just try to catch it a little bit. It's so artfully designed. Okay. There are pictures almost on every page, and this picture of someone who might be slightly familiar to our audience.
You know what? This is such good fun designing this with the team at Page 2 who produced the book with me. That little icon character. So there's, for each of my stories, there's a little version of me that goes through the stories. And we designed that for an earlier book, and it just didn't work in the earlier book. It just didn't fit. And I was like, I love this little dude, but it compromises the book to have it in there just for the sake of my ego. But when we came on this book, we're like, oh, this is a good fit.
No, it is because you share your journey with us, and we get to follow along. And also, the design it breaks things up. I mean, I want to say part of it is a workbook, but I don't say that in a diminutive sense because this is a complete book. This just you educate yourself and practice as you proceed and go forward in that, and that's it's part of the charm of this. So. You and my phrase, I don't know, I stole this from you. You said, you don't just read this book, you write in this book.
Look, I mean, the thing about books is it's hard to get a book to spark action. Like many books aren't that great in the first place, but to write a book and get people to do something differently as a result is pretty challenging because it's a single interface. And I'm really in the business of helping people be a force for change, which means helping them shift their behavior a little bit. So as best I could, I wanted to have a book that if you just wanted to read it, you could read it. But if you wanted to use it to do the work, you could do that. And if you wanted to do even more learning, there's a course at How to Begin and other resources at howtobegin.com that people can go to support the learning around this.
Well, the other thing is talking about books, and you and I are committed to the process of books, whatever. But you have your website, which we will put in the notes, mbs.works. It is its own creation. It's restlessly creative and inventive, and it just pops out at you. So there's a life beyond the page that really helps augment the messages of this, but also change. And that's what you are, like I said, a restless spirit. So you're always pushing. So
John, well, let me ask you if I can.
Sure.
What have you learned now in your journey around change and what it takes to change and evolve and grow?
Well, when I sit back and I analyze it, I think, oh, wow, I really did that. I'm kind of one like you. I'm not, I don't like the advice on goals, but we need our goals. I look back and I kind of said, wow, I did that, and really don't remember the hard work or what went into it. But the other thing, you know what it is for me, Michael, and this is both a strength and a weakness. I'm going on to the next project. Our colleague Ruth Gautian talked about in her book Success Factor with Olympic athletes and scientists and stuff. And with the Olympians, the easy models, they all have these gold medals, and they don't walk around with gold medals on. They're on to the next thing, Same with scientists. And that's what you are. You're kind of this Nobel laureate scientist of pushing the edge of stuff. And you had early on in the pandemic, you started the virtual tea. What was it?
It's called Cocktails and Questions.
Cocktails and Questions.
Yeah, that was a gathering of people. Yeah.
And so that's part of, I think this book could have a wider application. I think you could read this in a group, could you not? So
I think so. In fact, one of the points I make in one of the chapters is you're going to take on a worthy goal, and I hope people listening do, because I want them to unlock their greatness. I want them to claim ambition for themselves and for the world. It's hard to do that by yourself. And, one of the things that you and I are both part of is something called the Marshall Goldsmith 100, which is mathematically incorrect, but it is also a nice group of people.
Don't tell the secret of that. No.
There's a few more than 100 in there now.
We won't tell people that Marshall's first degree was in mathematics.
I know, ironically. But all sorts of people who you've had on this show have come through your relationship with them through the MG 100. And what you're doing is a great kind of generous form of hosting for people like Dory Clark and Ruth and me to come in and speak. And I think one of the maybe not fully intended, but definite kind of bonuses from that group is it's helped a lot of us find connection and support that we might not otherwise have had.
Without question, and I've said this before. I mean, to me, this was becoming a member of 100 Coaches was the best thing that happened to me in my stage of my career, and opened up a whole new world of connectivity. And I think we can have that in our own. You don't need to be a member of a certain group, but so many of our colleagues talk about having a quote board of advisors or mentors, and Ruth talks about serial mentors or several mentors at a time, and we can all benefit. But it requires, getting back to your word, bravery, opening yourself up and saying, "Hey, I need some help," or "May I have some advice?" So
I had a serial mentor for a while, but she kept just saying, "Eat Fruit Loops." And I'm like, this is not the cereal thing that I was expecting here. It turned out to be quite disappointing, but no matter. I moved on to porridge and I found my own path.
That's good. Anyway,
everybody listening is like, you can see that secretly I don't want to be an author. I want to be a stand-up comedian. All I'm lacking is the talent and the timing. But apart from that, I've got a great career ahead of me.
Oh, it's funny. I don't know you know that, but I lived in the UK for many years in the mid 70s, and there was a Carlin comedian from Northern Ireland, which is pretty tough to tell jokes at that time during the Troubles. But anyway, they said, well, he's not very funny, but its timing is perfect. Anyway, and so on a broader scope, life is timing, is it not? I mean, could you have written this book 5 years ago? No.
I couldn't have written this book 5 years ago because, there's a quote I love which kind of ties into this, which is inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. And, all of my books are the culmination of a bunch of things coalescing and making me go, oh, this plus this plus this. Actually, I think there's a book showing up here. Maybe there's a book I need to do, and some of it's what's happening as the world turns, and some of it's what I've been reading recently, and some of it's who I bumped into recently and talked to. So it depends.
And I'm glad you didn't write this book 5 years ago. And I will tell. And it was a thought that I had at the beginning, but it escaped me when I butchered your name. This book, How to Begin, is perfect for our time as we're hopefully getting out of the pandemic. But so many people are looking, is this what life's all about? Yeah. Should I make a change? Great resignation, whatever. This is a great way to take before you jump off a cliff. Read this book. So,
Yeah. And even after you've read the book, don't jump off a cliff. In general, don't jump off a cliff.
yeah.
But it is, I think it does kind of sync with the conversation people are having around at the moment, which is like, well, who am I and what do I want and how will I invest the hours of my life? You get one crack at it. So how do you make the most of that? And often it's not purely doing the thing you're doing right now, and a worthy goal might be something worth pursuing.
Well, let me shine a hot spotlight on you and get you in the crosshairs here. You built a company, a very successful company, Box of Crayons. You decided to do something different and walk away. Were you crazy, or why was it a good thing, Michael?
Yeah.
So
it's I walked away because I had a vision for Box of Crayons that me as CEO couldn't really fulfill. I am a okay-ish CEO. I was like, I give myself 5.5 or maybe 6 out of 10. And so not only was my inabilities as a CEO kind of limiting what I could do with the company, also it was taking up most of my time being inadequate. And I was like, I've got some skills and some goals that are around teaching and around writing and around influencing people through that, and spending the time being the strategist and the scaling and the hiring and all that stuff just didn't play to my strengths. So I was lucky in that I had 2 things. One is I had a very talented woman, Dr. Shannon Minifee, who would take over the role of CEO. And secondly, I was lucky and also did the work to say we hired a coach for 2 years to help us walk through that process, because CEO transitions, particularly founder transitions, are notoriously hard because founders are people like me. They're like prima donnas who have too much invested and stick their fingers in the pie and all that sort of stuff. And working with our coach, Jill Murphy, she was the one who helped kind of get us through the 2-year process of a graceful handing over of power.
That's great. Well, you hit on the word, and in every episode of the show, I ask people a story of grace. Do you have one you want to share again or new for us, Michael? So,
it's interesting. You must have heard 100 different definitions of grace, John. What's the definition that rings most true for you around how you think about grace right now?
It's a good question. It's a definition that when I wrote the book Grace, it was given to me, but it echoed. Grace is given to us with strings attached, and I salute Sally, our friend Sally Helgeson, for telling me that, and I grew up with it. But it reminded me what I've noticed from all the people that I've asked. I see sometimes grace as a simple transaction. Someone handed me a raincoat in a rainstorm, or life transforming, saved my life. I talked to a couple of combat veterans who had life-saving experiences like that, or transformative experiences. It was always an act of kindness shown to them that resonated. How it resonated is different for each of us.
Yeah. So. I was thinking about this before I came on the show, and I was like, I think that the way that I'm thinking about grace today is a generosity of spirit and an assumption of positive intent in the other person. So I don't want to really name names or talk about specific incidents. I would say that I can point to sometimes when I feel like I'm being screwed over or let down or, double crossed, to get melodramatic about it. And I've managed to assume the best and remain in a place of positive intent and be generous towards that person rather than not. And I'd say those are the moments that have been moments of grace that I've tried to create myself.
That's wonderful. And and I echo that 1,000%. And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about all the times that I have been felt wronged. And I've reacted like a jerk. So thank you for that reminder.
No, as have we all. As have we all. I'm like, I've had moments where I have not reacted the way I wanted, but I'm trying to emphasize the stuff where I've managed to get it right.
Great. Well, sadly, we are racing through this 30 minutes and we're at the end. So, Michael, how can people find you? And we'll put the notes in the notes. So,
look, the general place to find me is at mbs.works. That's the name of the website. And there's a free course there called The Year of Living Brilliantly. 52 teachers, 52 weeks, short video every time. If you're interested in the book, the new book, How to Begin, then go to howtobegin.com and you'll find ways to buy the book if you want that, or to get the free assorted bonuses and downloads, howtobegin.com.
Great. Michael, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. I always come away with a smile on my face, and I think a little smarter, or at least I think I am. So thank you for a great half hour.
Well, it's a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, everybody. I appreciate it.